I love studying if you take a look, I mean, the wars, I don't know what it is. The Civil War was
Here.
so fast.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so let just prepare for this. I'm gonna give you guys a few moments to prepare for this, and depending upon how I feel after this, I may move on to some other things, or I may decide to finish this off. But this is the main thing that I was waiting for him to say. So I'm just gonna give you guys a few moments to prepare yourself for this stable genius on what he's about to say. And then I will give you guys a bit of a history lesson.
Fascinating.
Let me give you guys a few moments. Let's prepare for this. I've seen this already, so I know what's to come. But for those of you who have not seen this yet, oh boy, is this a doozy! Get ready for this one. I don't know which ones were. I think the Revolutionary War thing with the airport may be a little worse, just in terms of just being completely delusional. But I think in terms of like making yourself look bigger than you actually are, and on top of that, making yourself seem like you're more, make yourself seem like you're a god. I think this one may be worse. Okay, you guys ready for this? Here we go.
It's so horrible. It was so horrible, but so fascinating. It was, I don't know, it was just different. I just find it, I'm so attracted to seeing it. So many mistakes were made. See, there was something I think could have been negotiated, to be honest with you. I think you could have negotiated that. All the people died. So many people died. That was the disaster. If you got hit by a bullet in the leg, you were essentially going to die or lose. So you had so many people, no legs, no arms. If you got hit in the arm or the leg, it meant you were up because the infection, gangrene. It was just such a, sort of a horrible time. But I was thinking to myself because I was reading something and I said, this is something that could have been negotiated. It was just for all those people to die, and it was a vicious, vicious war. And in many ways, look, they're all this nothing nice about it. But boy, that was a tough one for our country. But I think it's Abraham Lincoln. Of course, if you negotiated it, you probably wouldn't even know who Abraham Lincoln was. He would have been president, but he would have been president. He wouldn't have been the Abraham Lincoln. It would have been different, but that would have been okay. It would have been a thing that, and I know it very well. I know the whole process that they went through, and they just couldn't get along, and that would have been something negotiated, and they wouldn't have had that problem. But it was
I don't know if he goes any further.
it was a hell of a time, and you think.
Okay, so I think that's pretty much all he says about it. If he goes any further, I'll go further. I just wanted to let him finish that. Okay, let's get into this. If anyone knows history, they know you know he's wrong already. If you know about American history, you know that he's wrong already. But for those of you who may not remember from middle school or high school or whenever you were taught about this time in history, or, just if you don't remember or you didn't pay attention or what have you. Leading up to the Civil War, for the entire decade prior, following the Mexican-American War, and I mean even before this, there were, you had the Missouri Compromise in 1820, but especially after the Mexican-American War, where the U.S. essentially became the full U.S., at least within the continental U.S. It became that sea, from sea to shining sea, America. There were a bunch of proposals because back then you had the sectional crisis between the North and South over the expansion of slavery. And the Missouri Compromise had been, a lot of people after the Missouri Compromise thought the issue was settled. They thought, that the bottom line of the Missouri Compromise, if I remember correctly, it's the 48th parallel, was the line to determine, in the future whether a state was a slave state or a free state. But obviously, as the U.S. moved further west, slaveholders and the slave states realized, wait a second, we're not getting as much land in this deal as we would have liked. It worked in the 1820s when they were only worried about getting Missouri in as a slave state. But then they wanted to renegotiate and try to make a new deal. But no matter what deal was made, this was the era of compromises. This was the ultimate era of compromises. And it shows the fallacy of compromising when the two sides are so far up, not just far apart, but one side is completely adamant about one thing happening that the other side is just not willing to do. So the slave states were completely adamant on if they had their way, every state would have a choice, or every state would have the ability to have slaves. There would be no such thing as a free state. And, unfortunately, you also had the Supreme Court stepping in on this with the Dred Scott case that, essentially did make it that way to an extent. But the South just wanted more and more and more, and they could not be satiated no matter what you did. And this is Trump falling into his own mythos of being this ultimate negotiator. That is a load of BS. But if he would not have been able to fix this. No compromise would have been able to fix the divide between the North and South during that time. And to think that there is completely ignoring history. And to say that it was something easy, especially for Abraham Lincoln. It's one thing during the 1850s, during the sectional crisis, first off, there was no compromise that you could come up with that would satiate both sides anyway, as we saw. But on top of that, especially in 1860 with Abraham Lincoln, the South was just looking for, at that point, they were actually just looking for an excuse to secede. They were just looking for an excuse to break away. And so no matter what Lincoln said to, no matter what Lincoln tried to do, and I feel like the compromise that Trump would say, and I wonder if he's gonna say what he would do. I doubt it, because he knows that if he said what he would do, every historian would be up his ass saying, no, that wouldn't work, or it's asinine. But no matter the only, and I don't even really call this a compromise. I mean, granted, this is how Trump works. So it wouldn't really surprise me if this would be his suggestion. The only quote unquote compromise that would work in that sort of situation would be if Lincoln basically just let the Confederacy go. Now nowadays it would probably be better off for the country as a whole. Because the only two states, four states. Actually, I take that back. A lot has changed in recent history that has changed this to an extent, and there are bastions of civilization within the former Confederacy. But a lot of issues nowadays would be at least somewhat fixed if the South would have just been allowed to break away, honestly. But that would have been the only quote-unquote compromise that you could make that would have placated the South, is to just kowtow and let them break away. So this concept that somehow it was easy to negotiate out of the Civil War just shows how out of touch with reality and how full of himself Trump really is. So that's that's another history lesson for the day. That it's the fact that he said this is just absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Okay, that was the main thing I wanted to get to on this speech. I may go a little bit longer just to see if he says anything else very stupid, but I may jump into some other things.
Today, I would have absolutely stopped Putin. He would have never gone in, and he didn't.
Now he jumps into Putin, and he's trying to compare, which is absolutely ridiculous. He's trying to compare the Civil War to Putin, which is so wrong on so many different levels. Because for one, there weren't any compromise. I mean, outside of him being allowed to take Crimea, there haven't been any compromises with Putin. And I would say if Trump, especially with him talking about compromises and stuff like that, I feel like, and it's ironic because he's both. he's both in different ways. But when it comes to Putin, and when it comes to the whole Russia situation, Trump, if he were in office right now, I feel like he would very much be like Neville Chamberlain, where he would just allow Putin to take over Ukraine and without anything happening. And then who knows what happens next. Especially considering Trump also wanted to destroy NATO. So if Trump got his way and destroyed NATO, then Putin could have easily just taken over all of Eastern European, and there would be no NATO to force the U.S. to do something about it.
There was never even a threat. Tell me, who would talk? There was no way.
Exactly. He wanted it for a long time, so Trump, if he had gotten a second term, he probably would just let him have it.
And I told him, you can't go in. You go in, bad things are going to happen. And he would have never gone in.
But Biden said the same thing. I mean, unless you were going, it's funny. Trump supporters talk about how, Trump is supposedly anti-interventionist and whatnot, and against, against getting us into war and whatnot. But you're essentially saying if Putin would have gone into Ukraine under your administration, then what? You would have escalated it to World War III, which is exactly what you're accusing Biden of doing. Make that make sense.